Thank you. You've given us a good beginning, and so I want to jump in with a couple of questions before we open it up to the rest of the audience. I want to begin first, and then we'll work backwards. So you've said so many things, but you talk about transformation, and you talk about getting involved, and your book is called The Purpose of Power. So I want to first start by asking you, what do you mean by power? What's power?
Oh. All right, y'all ready for this? So power, to me, is the ability to determine your own circumstances and the circumstances of other people. Yours and other people's. We could talk about how you wield that power, but that's power. You get to make the rules, you get to change the rules for yourself and for others. You know you have power when you get to decide where money goes and where it doesn't go. That's power. Right? If you get to decide, all right, well, go ahead. Oh, I'm going to say more. If you get to decide, if teachers get hired, how much they get paid, you have power. You have power if you get to tell the story of who we are. You have power if you get to decide who gets what, when, and why. Okay? But we often confuse that with empowerment. Okay? Empowerment is feeling good about yourself. Self-esteem, if you will. You look in the mirror in the morning, you're like, you're fine. But people outside your home don't have homes, and people don't have clean drinking water, so you feel great. But nothing about your conditions has changed. That's empowerment. And one is not better than the other. You need empowerment, but you also need power. You need to be able to make the rules and change the rules. And I talk about this in the book because I think that the confusion between empowerment and power is one of our biggest obstacles and barriers. My friend Rashad says, presence is not power, power is power. It's not enough to have black people at the table if we're making the same decisions.
That's right. And so I was going to ask you, so what then becomes, because that's exactly right. So what's the difference between representation, right, and power, representation and controlling the agenda, and how do we move from empowerment to power?
Well, we have to integrate them. And the way that we get there, right, I think, is through organizing. We have to teach each other how to be the superheroes in our own stories and not wait for somebody else to do it. So that's one piece, right? When I was organizing in San Francisco for many years, we were talking with people about environmental racism and gentrification and displacement. And people would say, I hate the changes happening here. You can't afford to live here anymore. The housing is dilapidated. People would name all these problems, and you say, okay, what do you think we should do about it? People, I can't do anything about it. We should call somebody. We should sue, get a lawyer. And we're like, okay, but what could you do? What do you want to see happen? And people don't get asked that on a daily basis. So organizing is the process of helping people find their own power and bringing that power together and directing it at a goal. Okay. Young people who are incarcerated or in the foster system, which is another form, they know what needs to happen with that system, but they don't ever get asked, what would you build? If you could be the architect, what would you do? And then when you get those freedom dreams, then you go, okay, how are we going to get there? What do we need? What's our plan? What's the first step? Right? We have to build those muscles, and they are literally beaten out of us. We're not taught to think that way, and it's not encouraged. And so we're often debating other people's solutions. Well, I don't like what they're talking about, and I don't like what they're talking about, so I'm just going to sit out because I don't like what y'all are doing.
So, what you're also talking about is changing our models of leadership.
Absolutely.
And our understandings of what it means to be a leader. And so you're saying we've got to listen to the people who are unjustly incarcerated. They know what it takes to create a different system. The people who are hungry, they know what it takes to get food, to create a different system. But we have to listen to them. But we're stuck. How do we change the narrative and the model of leadership? It seems to me that's something that you all were trying to do with Black Lives Matter. How do we do that and make it stick?
Well, Kelly, if I knew that, we'd be in a different moment. You know, just to reference and get specific about leadership, when we wait for somebody else to do it, or we think that we don't have things to offer, we are really doing ourselves a disservice. And I'm not saying that as like a pep talk. I'm saying that actually as like living in a quote-unquote democracy requires that you be an architect, a real democracy, okay? An abbreviated democracy says just weigh in every so often. But a real democracy says, no, you have to be an architect. And I think there's a piece in here where, you know, the other day I caught the documentary that Soledad O'Brien and her team did on Rosa Parks. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. It's on Peabody. It's excellent. And they talk about all of the fallacies around leadership that I think we need to be paying attention to. Number one, we have to stop telling fairy tales about leadership and leaders. Leadership is hard. It kind of sucks, actually, right? Because a lot of reasons. We haven't figured out how not to put people on pedestals and then knock them down when they don't conform to our expectations. You know, I remember one time I can't remember, what was it? Oh, I like took a picture. I took a picture and you're wearing, what, is that leather? She's not a revolutionary. I was like, I was given this jacket. Like, what's happening right now? We knock people down when they don't conform to our ideals without being in relationship. That's what's wrong with leadership. Okay? We love leaders when they do stuff that we like. When leaders do things that we don't like, we don't engage critically, we knock. Okay? Or we abstain. Mm-hmm. Leadership requires engagement, and everyone can lead. Everyone can lead. Everybody has a role to play, and it's not the same role. So I think one of the things that I've noticed in movements is that sometimes people come in and they want to be the leader. And then you're having fights over who's the leader. There could actually be a lot of leaders. There should actually be a lot of leaders. Because when we have movements where there's one leader, well, you only have one person to take out. If we look at conflict, right, in places where they've tried new models, right, but they had one leader, what happened? Take the leader out. And then you spend the rest of your time arguing about who's the leader, and you forget about all the transformations you were trying to do. We are really conditioned to want to be the one. And then in this lifetime, we've celebritized leaders. Mm-hmm. We've celebritized leaders. Like, why do I get to jump to the front of the line? I'm just a regular person trying to do superhuman things. But there's a lot of people doing that. Why do I get to jump to the front of the line? Because we have this framework, right? Can you imagine Rosa Parks right now being like, Me first. No. Can you imagine her being like, you know what, I want to end segregation because I want people to know my name? No. No. That's not what we do. So let me say one more thing about leadership and how we get there. I think we have to have some reckonings with each other and ourselves. I left Black Lives Matter in 2017 to start the Black Futures Lab because of a lot of reasons, but the main one was I was like really obsessed with this question of electoral organizing. And some of my colleagues were like, we don't care about that. And I was like, that's actually okay. We don't all need to be doing the same thing. But if this is keeping me up at night, I have to follow that. So let's be fellow travelers, yeah? And then something really strange happened. What happens with leaders and with leadership is that, again, we, in our own movements, criminalize innovation, experimentation, not knowing the answer, making mistakes, changing your mind. We literally demonize it, and we do it more for some people than for others.
And those some people usually look
I'm getting
like
into it.
That's exactly. I mean, keep on. I'm looking.
You know,
Keep on.
there are leaders out here who don't fight bad laws because they get corporate dollars. But they're not getting the same vitriol as queer women, as Black women. You know, it's just different. And so I'm not trying to do that thing where it's like, look at yourself. But I think if we want to be successful, we have to really ask ourselves, what do we want out of leaders? Some of us are like, we don't want leaders. I don't believe in that either. Somebody's got to make decisions. And it can be like a rotating group of people, that's fine. But like, we're not being honest about that. People can play roles, right, and be leaders without it being corrupt and corrosive. I believe that. We can go back and forth. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we have to look at where are we replicating the same practices we say we want to dismantle? How are we still showing up in the hard stuff? We talk about like holding elected officials accountable and stuff like that, right? That's what that means. It means staying in it, being like, you made a decision that was horrible. I'm not with it, but I'm here to fix it with you. I'm here to be in struggle with you. I will go back and forth with you until the cows come home, until we get some kind of agreement about where we're going to go. And it might not be where we started. But sometimes what we're doing is we're with us when it's popular. And then when somebody has to make a hard decision or somebody makes a bad decision, we abandon them. And you know what we do? We leave room for other elements to come in and move them.
I like this notion, and you know, leaders are human beings.
Very
We're
much
all
so.
trying to.
Most of them.
Yeah, most of
them.
or claim to be human beings,
You know.
right? But we're, as I like to say, we're on the arc. If in the best of worlds, we're on the arc that bends toward justice, but we can make mistakes.
We will.
And will make mistakes. And what you are saying, that doesn't then mean we abandon or that we demonize. We say, you know, messed up, but let's fail forward.
Yep.
Right? One more question, and I'm going to open it up. We're in a seminary here.
Yeah, like, let's
right? In
chitty-chat.
a progressive seminary. Union has a long history of progressive Christianity, and this is where that's the legacy. So first of all, what are your disappointments in terms of progressive Christians, in terms of their role and the power in terms of the Christian right and the movement toward racial justice, etc.? And what do you think progressive Christians and other faith communities have to do to really have an impact on the public square and affect change?
Salud. You know, my disappointments mostly always lie with disappearing when it gets hard. You know, I want to put it in that human context because everybody knows what that feels like. Everybody in this room knows what that feels like, to like be going through a really hard thing and have people like turn their back on you, not show up for you. And that would be my biggest disappointment, is that sometimes our read of our faith and what guides us, our compass is off. Our compass is off. And a very human thing to do is to get lost in the details rather than see the forest for the trees. I get disappointed in using the rhetoric of faith to discriminate, divide, and leave people behind. You know, I have people I love in my life who have been politicized through their faith in all the wrong ways. And it's deeply painful because I know how much of an anchor my faith is for me. Like, I know, you know, it's my light. And I can't imagine my light telling me, you're wrong, Kelly. And I can't, not only can I not rock with you, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you don't have the things you need. I can't imagine what would be happening inside of me. And so that's my biggest disappointment. And so what can we do? We can organize. Take your stuff back. Take it back. This is not your legacy. This is not your legacy. Right? I mean, when we talk about the teachings, right? I'm reminded that we all have free will. So that means we get to choose how we practice, what we practice, who we practice with. And that doesn't mean you get to rewrite the stuff. It means you get to choose whether to look at it boldly and honestly, even where it hurts. It's like, ooh, that's rough. And you get to choose what you do with that. And so that's what I want to see, right? In my work, what I choose, even in relationship to my faith, is I choose to stay grounded in my values and my purpose. And sometimes that's hard, but I choose. And in doing so, what it means to me and for me is that I don't turn my backs on people. And I try to be, right, that person that someone can collapse on if they need to and know they're not going to hit the cold ground, right? And I think as a community, there's more of that that can be done. There's a lot more of that can be done.
Yeah, I like that. Show up even when it's hard.
That's right.
Let's open it up to questions. You're jumping off the edge of your seat, so
I'm
please.
ready. I'm ready for you.
Can we begin with a question from online community first, and then I'd love to go to students. Then
Yeah.
go to you.
So
So there's an online question. Can you talk about freedom dreaming as a practice?
Yeah, I can. And thank you, Robin Kelly, right, for giving us not necessarily the concept of freedom dreams, but for encouraging us to dig in. And it is a practice. It is a practice, and a practice that you have to do awake. It's hard. I encourage people to think about like a huge problem, a big one, poverty, sexism, and then go, what would I do about that? Don't do the thing of like, is it possible? Just what would I do about that? What would I do? Who would I do it with? Who would I need? How might I do it? Just like be in that practice all the time. One of the things I really appreciate about my time with the Domestic Workers Alliance is that that is always happening. Domestic workers have like a little bit of rights now because we fought for them, but like no rights, codified, right? Like state by state, but there's no federal protections for domestic workers. And so we always have to freedom dream. Okay, this is a big problem. What would we do? And we try stuff, and we mess up, we fail. Some things don't work, right? We've tried different forms of platforms where women could congregate and set their own wages, and employers could, input their resources in so that cleaners can have sick days and paid leave and all of that. And like, it's a big freedom dream. And not all of it works. And so then we go, okay, so how would we fix the things that don't work? It's just like a constant practice. And I want us to also notice what happens when we do it. So I say, don't just say it in your head, like write it down. And then notice what happens when you read it. And notice what happens when you try to put it on paper or on your computer, or however you do it. Like what comes up in you? I promise you, there's a voice in there that goes, that's not right. That's not right. That's not gonna work. What am I talking about? You might get up, walk around a little bit, come back to it. Like there's all this stuff that happens, right? It's important to notice all that. Because then you realize and recognize like, wow, this is a practice. This is something that I have to get grounded in and comfortable in, and it's gonna be a lifelong practice. At the Black Futures Lab, I have to think about this all the time. Not just outside, but inside. I built a team from scratch. So I'm constantly thinking, how do we do this? Okay, we have to figure this out. How do I get people to work together? I thought we would just do that. Oh no, like people have needs and they have insecurity. Okay, how do we deal with that, right? And just flow. Now, not every idea you have is going to be amazing. But the practice of having ideas is actually deeply radical in this country. So that's my answer for the online question.
Thank you. We had multiple students who were required to read this book, so I'm wondering, Larissa, you are raising your hand.
Sure.
Hey,
Hi, I'm Larissa, and I'm a student.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you for being here. And okay, I don't have to speak as loud anymore. I am really curious about your experience of talking with people who you don't agree with and what that process is like, because many of us here are called to be pastors, to be chaplains, to be priests, and that's a big part of it. And what's that like in your body, actually? Like, what's it like to sit with somebody, and not in an idea way, but in a here and now way?
Oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's some of the hardest work I've ever done. One, because I love to be right.
Yes.
I love to be right. And two, because I was trained to be right. In my organizing tradition, right, it's like we had debates. Where do you stand? You didn't get to be in the middle, that you were wishy-washy. Yes or no, right or wrong. And then in a lot of ways, we were also taught to not kick it with the people who didn't have the right answer, whatever we thought the right answer was. And so here's what I notice in my body. When I hear things that I disagree with, I get hot. And I start shifting, I start like rolling my neck. I have this thing that happens in my forehead that people have pointed out to me where my brow scrunches, so you might see me tapping my forehead. I literally do that just to like let the muscles release, if I notice it. I hunch, right? My palms get sweaty, and literally I can hear my like hearing go off. I go somewhere else. I start thinking about my grocery list, you know. So it is really a practice for me to stay in it. And like I try to like look somebody in their eye, and even if I tune out, which I do sometimes, what I'm thinking about is not my grocery list. I'm now thinking about what's important to you. What's important to you? Like, if I wasn't so worried about being right, and I was really just concerned with understanding what's at the core of this for you, would I think differently about what you were saying? Yeah, it is deeply human work to do what you all are studying and training to do and be, and I aspire. I'm in a nascent practice for the purposes of like passing laws, you know, but I also think about how I be with my friends, who I definitely don't always agree with, especially when it comes to politics. I have people I deeply love and have a great time with and like really enjoy their company until we start talking about their opinions about political stuff. And then I'm like, wait, you're my friend? Like, what is happening? No, they're still totally my friend. And if I can remember that, we're good. Sometimes I say, I'm really happy that you're passionate about something. And I like really mean it. I mean, I'm not like being shady. I'm like, it's good to be passionate about something, especially in today's world, right? I'd rather you be passionate than like in the clouds about what's happening. Last thing I will say here is I'm really good at cutting people off. And that's my stuff, right? It's like you leave before people leave you. And I think that that's some of what happens here. We leave before people leave us. So what I have found really valuable is a somatic practice and like working on all the stuff that's embedded in me that keeps me from connecting and that encourages me to isolate and to tune out and turn off. Those are all reactions to pain and fear. And not to be super like hippie with it, but it's some of the tools that keep me alive. Like being tuned into like, oh, what's happening here? Our bodies are wise. When I get hot, I'm like, wait, what? Oh, it's not the temperature. Something's happening here. Okay, then I can get present again. Okay, something's happening here. What's that? What do I need to do with that? Do I need to do anything? Sometimes no. Sometimes it's like, no, I'm upset. I don't like the stuff you're talking about. I might move past it, I might not. You heard me talk earlier, I've been thinking about this debate for 3 days. You know, I thought about calling the man up and being like, you know what, we're not finished here. But there'll be plenty more time. A whole year, actually, to keep having this debate.
Yes.
Thank you for your question.
I just want to thank you for making a difference in my life.
Thank you.
My question is, do you think about seminaries? Are seminaries in the struggle? Are they making a difference? We're in the seminary of Black liberation theology. But what I learned most appreciated about Reverend James Cone is that he realized he had created a black male-dominated theology. Wow. So he then edited 2 books about the womanist movement. So I most appreciate it. And then Union is one of the places where began the Unionists, the womanist movement. We're getting black women who are heads of seminary. Riverside Church has a womanist theologian now. So I want to know what you think. Are you working with seminaries? Are they making a difference? Black seminaries, white-controlled seminaries? in the South Bronx, where I've lived for 50 years and wrote my dissertation on the liberation of the South Bronx, we say the full phrase, anything about us, without us, is not for us.
That's right.
So I just want to have, how are seminaries doing in joining the movement, making a difference? Because as my companion tells me every day, until she gets power and wealth as a black woman in America, no other lives matter, which is why TikTok and Facebook keep knocking her off the air.
I can appreciate that. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your testimony. I wish we worked more with seminaries. My experience is we're in relationship, but not in work together. Yeah? So it doesn't have to be that way, but I just think we haven't spent the time, really haven't spent the time, speaking for myself, we haven't spent the time to be like, what could our joint work look like? So, you know, you have made sure, Kelly, that, you know, folks are reading my book, right? And that's amazing. Is that joint work? No. Can we do joint work? Yeah. Yeah. But we have to decide that we want to invest that time. And we have to spend some time talking about how do we want to be together? What's possible? I think for a lot of, in our movement, I should say, we could pay a lot more attention to how not to be transactional. What I know is that we have leaders of faith and houses of faith that are deeply embedded in this movement. I wish we were all more connected and aligned. It's like I know folk are out there. I know folk are doing good work. I know when we went to Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, we got people inside of a house of worship that had sworn it off because, right, of the commitment of the pastor of that place who said yes when another house said yes and then got scared because they were like, what did I just say yes to? The night before we were supposed to come. And Reverend Starsky said,
right, Starsky Wilson.
This is your home.
Right.
I don't even know y'all. I never met you in my life. This is you have 500 people coming from across the country. We'll figure it out. And then proceeded to give a sermon on Sunday, our last day, that I still have. It's called The Politics of Jesus. I got it on CD because it was so good. I have a photo from that morning of 500 young black people in that sanctuary with their fists up. It's not something that you see very often. So I want more. And I wish I could tell you, oh my gosh, there's this, there's that, there's this, there's that. But let's talk about the opportunity. Now, you know, we got things to do. We got so much things to do together. But it's not just us, right? So that would be my response. And then good for your partner for talking about what they need. I support that.
I think we have time for one more question. I want to get to this student.
Hi, thank you so much for your time today. I've really
Greetings.
enjoyed this talk. This question is actually inspired by a conversation I had with a friend in Bonhoeffer Room. And we live in a country that's obsessed with scale. And the metric of success is often scale. And my heart broke a little bit the day I got the email that Black Lives Matter became a super PAC, because I was like, oh, this organization is no longer the grassroots organization out of University Church. And so, especially in your transition to being more involved in electoral politics, what is your relationship with scale? And can you clarify more what your metric of success is?
Absolutely. That's such a good question. Let me say a couple things as context. Black Lives Matter has many entities. It started a super PAC, but it is not itself a super PAC. It has a grassroots network still. It also has a foundation, right? It has many different entities. And so it's important to say that because I would have the same concerns too. If all of a sudden I turn around and was like, yo, wait, it's not an organizing entity anymore, but it's actually many entities. And there's a lot I could say about that and how I feel about it, but I'm grateful to hear your feelings. Well, I'm not there anymore. So I could say what I think from afar, but I actually don't think that's that helpful. What I will say is this. I do also think that we are obsessed with scale, but that doesn't mean that I don't think we need to be thinking about it. So let me say more about what I think about that. When we talk about scale, you know, the way I understand it is moving people in the millions, right? And so everybody is focused on how do we move the most amount of people? And you're so right. Stuff can get watered down, diluted, all that. And we can miss that actually it feels like a little bit like a pipe dream that all of a sudden you're going to get millions of people to move. Except when I think about what happened in 2020. That is an example of a movement at scale. But it doesn't mean that everybody was moving to the same drum, doing the same thing, or even knew about each other. That's the contradiction to me. It's like, do we think that millions of people are going to move together at the same time in the same way? No. But is it important for millions of people to move? Yes. Local organizing is important. Relational, small-scale organizing is important. But I don't agree with the notion that we should prioritize one over the other, and that goes in either direction. I think the bigger challenge is that we don't think about them in tandem. In my work, I don't focus on what's happening at the federal level because we haven't built the power at the state and municipal level to really impact that in any kind of way that I care about. So I focus on municipal and state strategies, but that doesn't mean that I think that federal level organizing is not important. It's a strategy question to me of how you actually impact it. So when we talk about scale, how do you get to the millions? And how do you do local work well so that you can get to the millions? Doesn't mean the millions is the end. The millions is what shows you if you're winning hearts and minds, and that's important. Not to be all Hillary Clinton with it. I'm not trying to say hearts and minds are more important than, you know, you understand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to shade her, I'm just saying she said that one time. I don't worry about hearts and minds, I worry about changing rules. I was like, well, you kind of need both, right? So these are dynamic tensions in our movement that I think are important. I think we should have super PACs. We should. Imagine if we had a vehicle that was contending with power where it exists right now. Doesn't mean I think super PACs should exist in general, but as long as they do, why shouldn't we have one? That's the thing I think about, right? I think that we should be engaged in electoral organizing. I don't think electoral organizing is more important than community organizing, and in fact, I think they have to happen in tandem, or neither way do they work. I was a local community organizer for 15 years and didn't know, right, the ins and outs of how to change policy at the state level, and really had to learn a lot about how to do it on a local level. So what was I doing? I was talking to people, I was building relationships with people. Was I changing people's lives in material ways? I wanted to. Yeah. So for me, I think about the for what of scale. We're running a project right now called the Black Census. We're trying to get to 200,000 Black people to respond. That's 5% of the Black people in this country. I don't want to just get to 200,000 to say I got to 200,000. Who cares? It's kind of arbitrary. I want to be able to say I talked to 5% of the Black people in this country. And this is what we think. And we're all really different, but there's some things that are in common. And that is what I think can get us to move together at scale. But it's not just for the sake of like doing it. I share your concern too, because you did ask, what do I think about it? I share a concern about being more concerned with being flashy than being effective. You know? And I also know how hard it is to build vehicles like that so that they have power. That PAC has no power. Let me tell you how I know. My PAC has no power. We're building it. But let me tell you how I know. There's been no real meaningful police reform. People don't feel like there's consequences if they don't move it. There's no consequences, which means, right, that there are entities that are making it so that people feel like they don't need to move that. I want us to have that. I think we deserve to have that. But we have to think about how do we build that in a way that's different? Can we? These are like juicy debates I think we should get into. But I don't want us to just do it esoterically. I want us to try it in practice. For me, my biggest lesson from BLM is it's an experiment of failures and wins. And I wouldn't take it back. There's a lot of stuff that makes me go, there's a lot of things I've said that makes me go, oh, I don't believe that anymore. I don't think that anymore. Or, oh, I've evolved on this. Or, no, I still really believe that, right? But like, I wouldn't know unless we tried. And I feel really good about that. And I also don't think our season is over. And I still say our, even though I'm not running it. I'm not, you know, I'm doing my own thing in a parallel path. But I think we don't have enough practice. Now I know what it means to try to build a PAC that has power. I'm 5 years in. Nobody, do you know the name of my PAC? See? No, it's not your fault. I haven't built it to where you would know it. That's not your fault. That's how I gauge. Am I successful right now? Do you know the name of my PAC? If you don't, I got work to do. So that's how I think about it. Thank you for your question. I'm going to be thinking about it for the rest of the night now. I'll talk about it 3 days later, like, now talking about scale.
Thank you for your work. And for your time.